You think Christmas soul food was just ham and candied yams? Think again. Black families created holiday spreads that turned December tables into testimonies of love and survival. Let's dig into 60 Christmas soul foods from the 1960s and 70s that have disappeared. Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy, then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Candied yams with pineapple and pecans were the Christmas side dish that children actually asked for seconds of. Black mothers baked yams until tender, then peeled and sliced them thick, arranging them in buttered baking dishes. The syrup wasn't just butter and sugar, but included crushed pineapple with its juice, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and the secret addition of orange juice and zest that brightened the sweetness. Pecan halves were pressed into the top, creating a gorgeous presentation. The dish baked until the syrup thickened and caramelized, the pecans toasted, and the yams absorbed all those flavors. Some families added marshmallows for the last few minutes, but traditionalists kept it pure. The pineapple added moisture, while the orange juice kept them from being cloying. This dish appeared on every Christmas table, its sweet richness balancing savory meats. The orange juice addition stayed secret because it was the key to perfectly balanced sweetness. Boiled custard was a dessert meant to comfort the spirit as much as the body, a soft and soothing sweetness that wrapped around the senses like a blanket. Made from milk, sugar, and eggs beaten until pale, it was cooked gently on the stove, whisked slow and steady until thick enough to coat a spoon without curdling. If vanilla or nutmeg could be spared, they were stirred in last, their fragrance filling the kitchen like warmth itself. Too rich to drink and too delicate to slice, boiled custard occupied a tender middle ground between milk and pudding, a texture meant to be savored slowly. It was often poured into mugs and sipped by lamplight, steam curling in the air as families sat together after long days. On Christmas nights, it replaced eggnog for those who had no cream to spare, yet it offered the same joy and calm. Every spoonful was peace after hardship, sweetness earned through patience and care. It was the kind of dessert that didn't shout for attention. It whispered comfort, carrying memories of home, of togetherness, and of the quiet grace that makes ordinary things feel sacred. Boiled custard was Christmas distilled into warmth and kindness, proof that gentleness could fill a cup. Fried chicken livers with hot sauce delivered iron-rich organ meat in forms that even children would eat, especially when coated in seasoned flour and fried crispy golden brown. The livers were soaked in buttermilk to remove any bitterness, dredged in flour mixed with paprika, garlic powder, and cayenne, then fried quickly in hot oil until perfectly cooked. The result was crispy outside with creamy, almost mousse-like interior that melted in the mouth when cooked properly without overcooking into grainy texture. These provided concentrated nutrition, including iron, B vitamins, and protein in affordable packages costing less than $1 per pound at markets. Families served them as main dishes or snacks, with hot sauce being mandatory for many who loved the spicy, rich combination that made them addictive. In the 1970s, chicken livers were considered poor people's food that wealthier families avoided completely, meaning they stayed affordable and accessible for struggling families. Fried chicken livers represented nutritional wisdom disguised as soul food, proving that the cheapest cuts often delivered the most essential nutrients. Kidney stew was organ meat cooking at its richest, made by slowly braising pork or beef kidneys until tender and flavorful. Black mothers soaked the kidneys in milk or vinegar to remove any strong flavors, then sliced them and cooked them slowly with onions and gravy. The resulting stew was dark, savory, and intensely meaty, providing iron and protein that growing families needed. The kidneys had a unique texture, tender but slightly firm, and a flavor that was rich and mineral. Served over rice or with bread, kidney stew was filling and economical. In the 1920s, organ meats were common because they cost less than muscle meat but provided equal nutrition. Mothers knew that kidneys, properly prepared, were delicious rather than desperate food. The soaking process removed any unpleasant flavors, and slow cooking made them tender. Children who grew up eating kidney stew didn't find it strange. It was simply dinner. The dish represented nose-to-tail eating before it became a culinary trend. Kidney stew has largely disappeared as organ meats fell out of favor, but it once provided essential nourishment to Black families. Smothered chicken with rice and gravy defined Sunday tables when families wanted something special without expensive beef roasts taking up the budget. Whole chickens were cut into pieces, seasoned with salt, pepper, and paprika, then dredged in flour and fried golden brown until perfectly crisp. The chicken was then smothered in gravy made from pan drippings, onions, and broth, covered tightly, and cooked until meat nearly fell from the bone. The gravy turned silky brown, carrying flavor from seasoned flour and rendered chicken fat in every spoonful. Rice was prepared separately, each grain ready to catch every drop of precious gravy. Grandmothers judged younger cooks by their gravy consistency and ability to achieve that perfect golden crust before smothering began. This dish taught patience because rushing ruined everything about it. Families ate in reverent silence, broken only by requests for more gravy, more rice, and everything that made Sundays feel like salvation. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts delivered crispy, salty, and slightly sweet bites that children fought over despite not knowing exactly what water chestnuts were, the bacon exterior and crunchy interior creating mysterious but delicious combinations. Aunties would drain cans of whole water chestnuts, wrapping each one with half a strip of bacon and securing it with toothpicks before arranging them on baking sheets. Before baking, each bundle was brushed with a mixture of brown sugar and soy sauce that caramelized during cooking, creating a sweet salty glaze that coated the bacon. The water chestnuts roasted until the bacon was crispy and rendered, the fat dripping away while the sugar coating turned golden brown and slightly sticky. In Black households during the 1970s, bacon-wrapped water chestnuts represented sophistication borrowed from magazines, recipes that seemed fancy but remained simple for home cooks. Children loved them because bacon made everything better. Buttermilk cornbread with honey butter was Christmas dinner's supporting player that often stole the show. Black mothers made this in cast-iron skillets heated with bacon grease until smoking hot, creating a crust that shattered when you bit it. The cornbread was made with white cornmeal, buttermilk, eggs, and just enough flour to give it structure. The secret was adding creamed corn to the batter, which kept the cornbread moist for days. It baked until deep golden brown, almost burned at the edges, the center tender but not gummy. The honey butter was softened, butter whipped with honey until fluffy, but the ratio mattered. The cornbread was served hot, split open, and smeared with honey butter that melted into every crumb. This cornbread appeared at Christmas dinner to soak up potlikker from greens, gravy from dressing, and juices from ham. The creamed corn addition stayed secret because it was simple but effective. Sweet potato pie with cornmeal crust was the true heart of the Southern table, baked with love long before store-bought crusts ever appeared. The filling was made from mashed sweet potatoes whipped smooth with sugar, milk, and a hint of nutmeg or cinnamon, then poured into a crust of cornmeal and lard. That crust was golden and gritty, firm enough to hold but tender enough to crumble under a fork. As it baked, the scent of caramelized sweet potatoes and roasted corn filled the house, mingling with the sound of laughter and the hum of family gathering near the stove. This pie was both memory and meal, a creation born from the soil itself, made from two humble crops that had carried people through both hard times and harvests. It was a dish that did not need wealth to feel rich. Each slice offered sweetness that came not from sugar, but from care, from skill, and from the pride of feeding others. On Christmas tables, it gleamed like amber in the lamplight, a symbol of home, resilience, and gratitude. Sweet potato pie with cornmeal crust was more than dessert. It was the story of survival turned into something beautiful. Peach cobbler and cast iron was Summer Sunday's gift to Harlem families who stretched seasonal fruit into generous dessert that fed everyone at the table. Fresh peaches were sliced and tossed with sugar and cinnamon, then poured over batter made from flour, sugar, milk, and melted butter in a preheated skillet. The cobbler baked until the batter rose around the fruit, turning golden brown on top while staying soft underneath. Juices from the peaches bubbled up through the crust, creating pockets of caramelized fruit syrup that pooled at the edges invitingly. Families served it warm with cold cream poured over, the hot and cold temperatures creating perfect contrast in every spoonful. During peach season, cobblers appeared weekly, made in quantities large enough that leftovers survived until Tuesday breakfast. The cast iron gave the bottom crust an almost fried crispness that regular baking dishes could never match. Red rice with sausage brought Gullah traditions into urban black kitchens, creating one-pot meals that combined African cooking techniques with American ingredients in uniquely flavorful and satisfying ways. Long grain rice was cooked with smoked sausage, tomatoes, onions, peppers, and spices until the rice absorbed all the liquid and turned deep red throughout. The dish was savory, slightly spicy, and deeply satisfying, with each grain of rice coated in tomato richness and sausage fat for maximum flavor. This wasn't just food, but cultural heritage, connecting coastal African Americans to West African jollof rice through centuries of adaptation and survival across oceans. Families served this at celebrations, church dinners, and regular weeknight meals when rice and sausage were all the budget allowed for feeding everyone. In the 1970s, rice was among the cheapest starches available, and smoked sausage provided maximum flavor from minimal meat for economical cooking. Red rice with sausage represented cultural continuity and African heritage, surviving through food traditions that connected past to present. Cocktail meatballs simmered in grape jelly and chili sauce created sweet, savory bites that children couldn't resist, the glossy sauce coating each meatball like candy while delivering unexpected flavors. Mothers would brown frozen meatballs in skillets before transferring them to slow cookers or pots where they simmered in a mixture of grape jelly and bottled chili sauce that melted together into a thick, shiny glaze. The combination sounded strange but tasted magical, the grape jelly's sweetness balancing the chili sauce's tang and creating a flavor profile that kept people reaching for more. As the meatballs simmered, they absorbed the sauce and became tender, the exterior developing a sticky coating that made them perfect for spearing with toothpicks. In Black households during the 1970s, these cocktail meatballs represented easy elegance, a recipe that seemed fancy but required minimal effort. Children loved them because they were bite-sized, required no cutting, and tasted like a sweet, savory treat. Hot wassail with spices was the Christmas drink that kept a pot simmering on the stove throughout the holidays. Black mothers made this with apple cider, orange juice, lemon juice, and the secret spice blend: whole cloves, cinnamon sticks, allspice berries, and star anise tied in cheesecloth. The mixture simmered for hours, filling the house with smell that announced Christmas more than any decoration could. The secret addition was cranberry juice and a splash of rum or brandy that added complexity without making it boozy. The wassail was served in mugs to guests who dropped by, to children coming in from playing in snow, to adults gathered around the tree. Each mug was garnished with an orange slice studded with cloves. The spice blend and cranberry addition stayed secret because these created depth that plain apple cider couldn't match. Mothers kept the pot going from Christmas Eve through New Year's Day. Pig ear sandwiches were proof that nothing went to waste in a kitchen where every scrap had purpose. The ears were cleaned carefully, boiled for hours until tender, then fried to a golden crispness that crackled at the edges and chewed soft in the middle. Served on white bread with mustard or hot sauce, they carried a flavor deep as smoke and history itself. For many, it was the taste of home, born from necessity but remembered with pride. During Christmas gatherings, when the choicer cuts were long gone, pig ear sandwiches kept the celebration going late into the night. People gathered around the stove, swapping stories as grease popped and laughter rose. Each bite told a story of endurance, creativity, and gratitude for what the land and labor could provide. Pig ear sandwiches were not luxury food, they were legacy food, a reminder that dignity and flavor can thrive even in poverty's shadow. Cornbread dressing made from scratch became holiday tradition that stretched expensive turkey into meals feeding extended families gathering from across cities and states for celebration. Day-old cornbread was crumbled and mixed with sautéed onions, celery, sage, chicken broth, and eggs, then baked until golden on top and creamy inside with perfect texture. This wasn't stuffing cooked inside the bird, but Southern dressing baked separately in pans, allowing better control over texture and flavor throughout. The cornbread absorbed the broth and seasonings, becoming savory and moist with crispy edges that everyone fought over at dinner tables. Families made huge pans because this was as important as the turkey itself, sometimes more important given its cultural significance to gatherings. In the 1970s, cornmeal was cheap enough that making cornbread for dressing didn't stress budgets even during expensive holiday meals celebrated properly. Each family had their own variations, with recipes guarded and passed down through generations of women who took pride in their dressing. Fried corn off the cob brought late summer abundance to Sunday tables where fresh vegetables were treated with reverence and careful technique by knowing cooks. Corn kernels were cut from the cob with sharp knives, then the cob was scraped thoroughly to release the milky starch that would thicken the dish naturally without any flour. The kernels were fried slowly in butter with a little water, covered, and allowed to steam until tender while the natural starches created creamy consistency that coated every kernel. Salt, pepper, and sometimes a touch of sugar enhanced the corn's sweetness without masking its fresh flavor. This wasn't creamed corn from cans, but fresh corn transformed through simple technique and patient attention to detail. Families made this only when corn was in season, making it seasonal celebration worth anticipating each year. The dish taught children that fresh vegetables needed minimal intervention to shine their brightest on any Sunday table. Oxtail stew transformed the tail of cattle into fall-off-the-bone tender meat swimming in rich, gelatinous gravy that coated everything perfectly when served over white rice. The oxtails were browned first to develop deep flavor, then slowly braised with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and red wine or broth for hours until the meat became incredibly tender and rich. The bones released collagen and marrow, thickening the sauce naturally and creating richness that couldn't be achieved any other way with cheaper ingredients. This wasn't quick food, but patient food, requiring hours of low heat to transform tough connective tissue into silky texture worth waiting for. Families served this on special occasions despite the humble ingredient because the preparation demanded time and attention that showed love clearly. In the 1970s, oxtails were considered throwaway cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for Black families who understood their potential for transformation into something special. The dish represented culinary alchemy, showing how time, technique, and patience could transform the least desirable cuts. Black walnut pound cake carried the wild woods straight into the holiday kitchen with a perfume unlike any other. Foragers collected the hard-shelled nuts each autumn, cracking them carefully to release the dark, robust kernels inside. The cake batter, rich with butter and eggs, absorbed the strong, earthy flavor of the walnuts, baking into a loaf dense enough to slice thin and savor slowly. Served at Christmas or family reunions, the cake announced both celebration and the success of gathering nature's bounty. Children helped shell the nuts, their hands stained brown from the husks, a seasonal badge of honor. Neighbors traded slices wrapped in wax paper as gifts, spreading cheer through the community. Today, imported walnuts and commercial cakes have replaced the ritual, but the memory of that deep, almost smoky taste lingers for those who once enjoyed a slice with coffee while snow fell outside and the house smelled of spice and toasting nuts. Asparagus wrapped in ham created elegant finger food that introduced children to vegetables they might not try otherwise, the salty ham making the asparagus taste less intimidating. Mothers would blanch fresh asparagus spears briefly in boiling water until they turned bright green and became slightly tender, then plunge them into ice water. Each asparagus spear was then wrapped with a thin slice of deli ham, sometimes spread with cream cheese or mustard first for extra flavor. The wrapped spears were arranged on serving platters, sometimes secured with toothpicks if the ham wouldn't stay wrapped. In Black households during the 1970s, asparagus wrapped in ham represented sophistication borrowed from magazine recipes, appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because the ham provided familiar salty flavor, while the asparagus added crunch and color, making vegetables feel like treats rather than obligations. Black walnut pound cake was the Christmas treat that required foraging wild nuts in fall. Black mothers cracked black walnuts by hand, extracting the dark, intensely flavored meats that made English walnuts taste bland. The pound cake was traditional: butter, sugar, eggs, flour, but the black walnuts transformed it into something earthy and complex. The nuts were toasted lightly, then folded into the batter just before baking. The secret was using both butter and shortening in equal parts, which created pound cake that was tender but still had proper heft. A splash of bourbon enhanced the walnut's natural flavor. The cake baked in a tube pan until golden brown, filling the house with aroma that was impossible to resist. It cooled completely before being wrapped and stored, improving over several days as flavors deepened. Black walnuts stayed secret because finding and processing them required knowledge that not everyone had. Okra fritters with corn silk were the kind of kitchen magic that only came from necessity and imagination. In the long summer months, when the fields were full and money was not, people used every part of what they harvested. The corn silk that clung to the ears was not thrown away, but saved and shredded, added into batter alongside chopped okra, flour, and a splash of milk or water. When dropped into hot oil, the fritters puffed and crackled, their edges turning golden and crisp. The smell was something you could follow from down the road. Warm, nutty, and sweet with that faint scent of corn. Each bite was crunchy on the outside and tender in the middle, with little strings of corn silk that gave it texture and charm. They were served with syrup or vinegar, depending on what the family had, eaten right out of the pan when patience ran out. Okra fritters with corn silk were food born from care and cleverness, proof that waste had no place in a humble kitchen. Every family had its own version, passed quietly between generations, carrying the taste of late afternoons, hard work, and simple joy. They were poverty's poetry, fried into something worth remembering. Cheese straws made from sharp cheddar and cayenne pepper were crispy, addictive sticks that disappeared from serving bowls almost as quickly as they were refilled, their orange gold color and spicy kick making them irresistible. Grandmothers would grate blocks of sharp cheddar by hand, mixing it with softened butter, flour, cayenne pepper, and salt until the dough came together, then pressing it through cookie presses or rolling it into long ropes before slicing. The cheese straws baked until crispy and slightly browned at the edges, filling kitchens with the sharp, tangy aroma of melting cheese mixed with subtle heat. Once cooled, they were stored in tins, maintaining crispness for days. In 1970s, Black households, cheese straws represented Southern tradition, recipes passed down through generations with each family adding their signature touch: extra cayenne, paprika, or pecans. Collard greens with smoked turkey and hot pepper vinegar were Christmas dinner tradition that proved vegetables could be the star of the plate. Black mothers started preparation Christmas Eve, washing greens leaf by leaf to remove every speck of grit. The greens were cooked low and slow with smoked turkey necks or wings, onions, garlic, and the secret addition: a ham hock for extra richness. The pot simmered for hours until the greens turned dark and tender, the broth becoming Potlikker so flavorful it could be sipped alone. The finishing touch was hot pepper vinegar, white vinegar infused with hot peppers for weeks, splashed over the greens just before serving. The vinegar brightened the rich greens and added heat that cut through their earthiness. These greens appeared on Christmas tables alongside ham and turkey, often eaten with cornbread to soak up the Potlikker. The ham hock addition and the hot pepper vinegar technique stayed secret because these created depth and complexity that plain greens couldn't match. Cabbage and smoked sausage stew was what happened when wisdom met hunger and turned necessity into nourishment. In many kitchens, just one link of sausage was enough to flavor an entire pot, its smoky saltiness seeping deep into the tender folds of cabbage and the soft cubes of potato below. Everything simmered slowly on the stove through the afternoon, filling the home with a smell that felt like safety itself. For Christmas, this humble stew took on special meaning, a dish that stretched small portions into abundance, gathering families around steaming bowls and simple gratitude. The broth was rich without being heavy, each bite balanced between spice and sweetness, softness and strength. No one left hungry, no matter how modest the table. The stew reminded everyone that good food was not about excess, but about intention, about patience and care. Every spoonful carried the echo of firewood crackling, hands stirring, and voices laughing nearby. Cabbage and smoked sausage stew was proof that celebration does not come from wealth, but from the warmth that fills a kitchen when people share what they have. Pig ears, boiled then fried, transformed another discarded cut into crispy, gelatinous treats that appeared at gatherings and celebrations throughout Black communities nationwide during warm months. The ears were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then sliced into strips, breaded, and deep-fried until golden and crispy on the outside with satisfying crunch. The texture was unique, with crispy breading giving way to tender cartilage that had a satisfying chew unlike any other food available anywhere. These weren't everyday food, but special treats that showed up at fish fries, family reunions, and summer cookouts where people gathered to celebrate. The ears provided collagen and minerals while costing almost nothing per pound, since most butchers were happy to sell what they couldn't move otherwise to anyone. In the 1970s, pig ears represented nose-to-tail eating decades before it became fashionable in upscale restaurants charging premium prices. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and at what temperature to fry perfectly. Red rice with sausage brought low-country goula traditions to Harlem Sunday tables, where families recreated coastal Carolina flavors in apartment kitchens. The dish started with rendered sausage fat, then onions, peppers, and celery were sautéed before crushed tomatoes were added and cooked down. Rice was added directly to this base and cooked until each grain absorbed color and flavor, turning everything a deep, beautiful red. Smoked sausage coins were folded in at the end, adding pockets of savory richness. The dish carried complex flavors from simple ingredients, proving technique mattered more than expensive components. Gullah families who migrated north brought this recipe as cultural treasure, teaching it to children who had never seen the Sea Islands. The rice had to be cooked precisely, neither mushy nor undercooked. Red rice appeared at Sunday dinners and celebrations throughout Harlem, its distinctive color making it instantly recognizable. Fried Spam with eggs became breakfast solution when bacon was too expensive and families needed protein to start long days of work and school right. Spam was sliced thick and fried until the edges caramelized and crisped while the center stayed tender, creating textural contrasts that made the processed meat more interesting and actually delicious. Eggs were fried in the same pan, picking up the salty, meaty flavors from the Spam's rendered fat for perfect combination. Together, they created breakfast that provided sustained energy and cost less than 50 cents to feed 4 people every morning. In the 1970s, Spam represented wartime ingenuity that continued helping families stretch food budgets long after rationing ended throughout the country. The canned meat didn't require refrigeration and lasted indefinitely, making it perfect for households with unreliable power or limited storage space available. Fried Spam with eggs represented pragmatism over pretension, showing that feeding your family mattered more than impressing anyone with fancy ingredients or sophisticated cooking techniques. Wild plum jam tartlets were little treasures made from what the land gave freely, turning foraged fruit into sweetness that carried through the seasons. When wild plums ripened in the heat of summer, Families gathered them from the edges of fields and fence rows, their tart skins staining fingers deep red. Those plums were boiled down with sugar and patience, stirred until they thickened into a glossy jam that caught the sunlight like stained glass. Stored in jars through the long months, that jam became a promise of warmth when winter arrived. By Christmas, scraps of pie dough or leftover biscuit dough were rolled thin and filled with a spoonful of that plum preserve, then folded and baked until the air filled with the scent of fruit and flour mingled together. They came out bubbling, their centers jeweled and edges browned, each one small enough to vanish in 2 bites, but rich enough to linger in memory. Shared during church gatherings or family dinners, they were a reminder that sweetness didn't come from wealth. It came from will, from time, from knowing how to make something precious out of what was freely given. Wild plum tartlets weren't just dessert. They were evidence that nature and nurture could meet in a single bite. Goosefoot seed meal offered vital nourishment when cultivated grains were scarce or too costly. Goosefoot, also known as lamb's quarters, grew abundantly along field edges and yielded tiny seeds rich in protein and minerals. Enslaved harvesters shook the plants over cloths to collect the seeds, then winnowed and ground them into a fine flour. This flour could be cooked into hot cereal, mixed with cornmeal for bread, or used to thicken stews, providing a surprisingly hearty alternative to purchased grain. The practice drew on both African and indigenous traditions of using wild seeds as staple foods. Even after emancipation, rural families in parts of the Midwest and Appalachia continued to gather goosefoot seeds for their high nutritional value. Modern interest in quinoa, which is a close relative, echoes this old wisdom. Goosefoot seed meal stands as a reminder that careful attention to the landscape and patient handwork could turn what many considered weeds into a dependable source of strength and nourishment that kept families fed through the hardest seasons. Cream cheese and olive pinwheels, made with softened cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives and rolled in tortillas, created tangy, savory bites. Children found intriguing. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with finely chopped green olives, pimentos, and sometimes a touch of garlic powder, spreading the mixture evenly on flour tortillas. The tortillas were rolled tightly, wrapped in plastic, and refrigerated for hours to firm up before being sliced into colorful pinwheels. Each slice revealed swirls of white cream cheese dotted with green olive pieces, creating visual appeal that drew children's attention. In 1970s, Black households, these pinwheels represented creative entertaining, showing how simple ingredients could become elegant appetizers. Children loved them because they were fun to look at, easy to eat, and introduced them to olives in a creamy format that made the vegetables more approachable and less intimidating than eating them whole. Ambrosia salad with fresh coconut was the Christmas side dish that straddled dessert and salad. Black mothers made this using fresh fruit, mandarin oranges, pineapple chunks, maraschino cherries, and the secret addition of pomegranate seeds that added jewel-tone color and tart brightness. The binding agent wasn't just whipped cream, but a mixture of whipped cream, sour cream, and cream cheese that gave it tanginess. Fresh coconut was grated and toasted lightly, adding nutty depth that sweetened flaked coconut couldn't match. Mini marshmallows were folded in at the last minute so they stayed soft. The salad was refrigerated for several hours, letting flavors meld while the coconut softened. It was served in crystal bowls at Christmas dinner, looking almost too pretty to eat with pink and white and red colors. The pomegranate addition and the cream cheese mixture stayed secret because these elevated ambrosia from church potluck standard to something genuinely special. Sweet potato tea cakes were the taste of Christmas love, hand-shaped and baked with care when pie fixings were too dear. Mashed sweet potatoes took the place of expensive butter, giving each cake a soft golden hue and a sweetness all its own. The dough was mixed in big wooden bowls, rolled out on floured tables, and cut into circles by jar lids or tin cups. When they came out of the oven, the air turned rich with spice and sugar. These little cakes were passed around in napkins at church socials or packed for neighbors as gifts. Each one told a story of resourceful joy, how something so simple could still feel special. Children waited by the stove for the first warm bite, soft and fragrant in their hands. Sweet potato tea cakes were humble and heavenly, proof that love could rise even without plenty. Neck bones and potatoes simmered together became winter comfort food that warmed kitchens and filled bellies when cold weather made hunger feel even more desperate and urgent. Pork neck bones were browned first to develop flavor, then covered with water, potatoes, onions, and seasonings before simmering until meat fell from bones easily. The potatoes absorbed the porky richness, becoming creamy and flavorful while the meat turned silky and tender with hours of patient cooking. This one-pot meal required minimal attention once assembled, making it perfect for busy mothers managing multiple responsibilities throughout long days. The bones released gelatin and marrow into the broth, creating body and richness that made the dish feel more substantial than its simple ingredients suggested it would. In the 1970s, neck bones cost almost nothing per pound, and potatoes were among the cheapest vegetables available year-round in any market. Neck bones and potatoes represented making something from nothing, proving that the cheapest cuts combined with basic vegetables could create genuine comfort. Chitlins with vinegar and onions appeared on special Sunday tables where families celebrated tradition regardless of how neighbors reacted to the distinctive aroma. Pig intestines were cleaned meticulously over hours, boiled repeatedly with vinegar to remove impurity before being simmered with onions, bay leaves, and crushed red pepper until tender. The smell announced itself boldly through hallways and streets. For families who understood, chitlins represented ultimate waste-nothing cooking, transforming what others discarded into something deeply flavorful. The texture was chewy and slightly gelatinous, requiring thorough cooking but rewarding patience. Hot sauce and additional vinegar were passed at the table for personal adjustment. This wasn't everyday food, but holiday and Sunday fare reserved for gatherings where everyone understood cultural significance. Eating chitlins in Harlem connected families to Southern roots and ancestors who first made this dish. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes created summer dishes that combined fresh vegetables with smoked pork in ways that made even vegetable-hating children clean their plates completely. Fresh or frozen lima beans were simmered with ham pieces, tomatoes, onions, and peppers until the beans were creamy and the tomatoes had broken down into sauce coating everything. The acidity from tomatoes balanced the beans' starchiness, while the ham added smokiness and salt that brought all flavors together into cohesive whole. This one-pot meal required minimal supervision once assembled, making it perfect for hot summer days when standing over stoves felt absolutely unbearable. The dish was nutritious and filling, providing protein, fiber, and vitamins all in one bowl served over rice for complete meals. In the 1970s, lima beans were garden staples that families grew themselves or purchased frozen in bulk economically at stores. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes represented seasonal cooking and the satisfaction of eating fresh produce prepared simply but deliciously. Blackstrap molasses cookies were the dark heart of Christmas baking, chewy, spicy, and rich with history that stretched across generations. The thick, bittersweet molasses gave them not only color and depth, but also a sense of place, a reminder of fields and mills where the syrup first began. Into that dark richness went cinnamon, cloves, and ginger, each spice a whisper of warmth and memory. The dough, heavy in the bowl, stuck to wooden spoons and flour-dusted fingers, shaped by hands that worked hard but still found time to create something sweet. When baked, the cookies filled every room with the scent of sugar-meeting smoke, a smell that clung to curtains and hearts alike. They were soft inside, sturdy outside, meant to last through the holidays or be packed into tins for neighbors and friends. Children would sneak them warm from the pan, their faces sticky with molasses and smiles. Every batch told a story of endurance, the kind of sweetness carved out of scarcity. In their darkness was comfort, in their simplicity, pride. These cookies were more than dessert. They were memory baked into spice and patience, carrying with them the unspoken truth that love always finds a way to rise, even in lean times. Wild muscadine grape jam brought the late summer woods to the breakfast table in a deep purple shine. Children and parents walked along fence lines and wooded edges with baskets in hand, searching for the thick-skinned grapes that thrived in southern heat. Once gathered, the fruit was boiled gently until the skins burst and the pulp softened, filling kitchens with a fragrance that hinted at honey and earth. The juice was strained and mixed with sugar, then cooked again until it thickened into a jam rich enough to spread over biscuits or stir into morning porridge. Families prized each jar, knowing that muscadines grew wild and free, needing only careful hands and patience to become something sweet. In some towns, church groups organized picking days, turning the harvest into a social event where songs and laughter echoed through the vines. Today, supermarket grapes have replaced the wild hunt, and store-bought jams lack the musky depth of fruit ripened under southern sun. But memories of purple-stained fingers still linger in many hearts. Smoked oysters on crackers with hot sauce were adventurous bites that curious children tried. The smoky, briny oysters creating complex flavors that divided people into lovers and haters with no middle ground. Fathers would open tins of smoked oysters packed in oil, arranging them on serving platters surrounded by crackers and providing small bottles of hot sauce for those who wanted extra heat. The oysters had a strong, distinctive flavor, smoky from the curing process and intensely oceanic. Each oyster was placed on a cracker, sometimes with a tiny drop of hot sauce, creating bite-sized portions that delivered maximum flavor. In 1970s, Black household smoked oysters represented coastal sophistication and culinary bravery, appetizers that showed guests the host was willing to serve bold, distinctive foods. Children who tried smoked oysters either loved them immediately or swore them off forever, the strong flavor creating lasting memories. Pigs in blankets made with cocktail franks wrapped in crescent roll dough emerged from ovens as perfect little packages that children ate by the handful, their small size making them perfect for young appetites and hands that grabbed multiple pieces at once. Mothers would unroll refrigerated crescent dough, separating it along the perforations before cutting each triangle in half to create smaller pieces that wrapped around cocktail-sized hot dogs snugly. The wrapped franks were arranged on baking sheets with the dough seam facing down, sometimes brushed with melted butter or beaten egg for extra golden color. As they baked, the dough puffed up and turned flaky and golden, while the franks inside steamed and stayed juicy, creating combinations of textures that made every bite satisfying. In the 1970s, Black households, pigs in blankets represented quick, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Children loved them because they were perfectly sized for little hands. Buttermilk Sky biscuits were Christmas morning tradition, tall and fluffy and buttery enough to make store-bought rolls irrelevant. Black mothers made these before sunrise using self-rising flour, buttermilk, and cold butter cut into pea-sized pieces, never melted, because that destroyed flakiness. The secret was handling the dough minimally, folding it exactly 3 times to create layers without developing gluten. Some grandmothers used white lily flour specifically, swearing nothing else produced the same tenderness. The shaped biscuits were placed touching in cast iron skillets, so sides stayed soft while tops and bottoms crisped. Before baking, each was brushed with melted butter mixed with honey, not enough to make them sweet, just enough to create a golden glaze. They baked until risen to twice their height, then were brushed with more honey butter while hot. The recipe stayed secret because perfect biscuits required technique more than ingredients. Chitterlings, known lovingly as chitlins, were not for the faint of heart, but for those who knew the value of patience and pride. These were the cleaned and boiled intestines of the hog, cooked down for hours until tender and fragrant. What some saw as scraps, others turned into delicacy, a meal shared on holidays to honor endurance itself. Preparing chitlins was an act of devotion, from the endless washing to the slow simmer with onions, vinegar, and spice. They filled homes with a smell that spoke of both hardship and heritage, a reminder that survival had its own flavor. Served with hot sauce and cornbread, they were more than food. They were history in a pot. On Christmas tables across the South, chitlins weren't just eaten, they were respected, a symbol of making beauty from what others cast aside. Fried chicken wings, before they became trendy and expensive, were the discarded parts of chickens that Black families transformed into crispy, flavorful snacks and satisfying meals. The wings were seasoned simply with salt, pepper, and garlic powder, dredged in flour, then fried until golden and crispy in hot oil or lard that made them absolutely delicious. The skin crisped perfectly while the small amount of meat stayed juicy, creating satisfying bites that disappeared quickly from plates at gatherings. These weren't considered premium food in the 1970s, when most people wanted breasts and thighs instead of bony wings nobody else wanted. That meant wings cost almost nothing per pound, sometimes given away free by butchers trying to clear inventory from coolers. Families made huge batches for weekend gatherings, serving them with hot sauce and white bread for perfect combinations. Fried chicken wings represented finding value in what others overlooked, transforming cheap cuts into genuinely delicious food that eventually became so popular they're now expensive. Hoghead cheese, or souse meat, was not fancy food, but it had deep roots in tradition and respect for what you had. Made from the head of the pig, boiled, seasoned, and set in its own broth, it was a dish born from necessity and pride. It was eaten cold, sliced thin, and often shared at the table with crackers and conversation. What others might have thrown away became something flavorful and lasting in the right hands. It spoke of times when wasting food was unthinkable, when every part of the animal was used to honor the work that went into raising it. The smell of it cooking filled the whole house, sharp and strong, but it was the kind of smell that meant good things were coming. When cooled and sliced, it glistened in the light like proof of survival itself. Each piece held a story of long days, careful hands, and families who knew that resourcefulness was its own kind of wealth. Souse meat wasn't about glamour, it was about gratitude. Even if you didn't grow up eating it, the story it told was universal. Make do, make it good, and never take a meal for granted. Mustard greens with ham hocks delivered bitter, peppery flavors that balanced the smoky pork perfectly while providing vitamins and minerals essential for health and sustained well-being. The greens were cleaned thoroughly, then cooked low and slow with ham hocks, onions, vinegar, and hot sauce until tender, but still maintaining some texture throughout. The bitterness mellowed during cooking, balanced by the pork's saltiness and the vinegar's tang, creating complex flavors that developed over hours of patient simmering. The Potlikker was considered especially valuable, packed with vitamins leached from the greens and rich with pork flavor worth savoring. Families served this with cornbread and hot sauce, with children learning to appreciate the bitter notes that many initially resisted eating. In the 1970s, mustard greens grew easily in southern gardens and could be purchased cheaply at markets when homegrown weren't available for picking. Mustard greens with ham hocks represented Southern cooking wisdom, showing how proper preparation made even bitter vegetables into food people actually wanted to eat. Peanut brittle from roasted peanuts was a candy of patience, timing, and steady hands. It began with the scent of nuts roasting in the oven, their skins crackling and releasing a warm, earthy aroma that filled the house. Meanwhile, sugar syrup simmered on the stove, bubbling to just the right amber hue that signaled it was ready. Too soon, and the candy would never harden. Too late, and it would turn bitter and blackened. Into that fragile in-between moment went the peanuts, stirred until everyone glistened under its thin coat of syrup. The mixture was poured out onto greased pans, spread thin, and left to cool. As it hardened, it crackled and popped, breaking apart into glassy golden pieces that shone in the light. The taste was sharp, sweet, and nutty all at once. Simple ingredients transformed into something almost magical. At Christmas, bags of brittle were passed from hand to hand, wrapped in paper or cloth, each one a little gift made of patience and fire. Making it was as much about the process as the candy itself. A ritual of watching, stirring, and waiting that bound generations together. Every shard of peanut brittle carried the memory of laughter, the echo of wooden spoons against iron pots, and the sweetness that could only come from endurance. Sweet potato biscuits were the soft-spoken stars of every humble table. Made from mashed sweet potatoes, flour, and a touch of lard, they carried the sweetness of the earth and the strength of those who planted it. Each biscuit came out of the oven golden, warm, and smelling like home. Sweet potatoes were a gift crop, tough enough to thrive when others failed, and they carried families through hard seasons. These biscuits stretched what little was available into something that felt like luxury. They were eaten for breakfast with syrup or alongside greens and stew at supper. No matter when, they always brought a comfort that money could not buy. The dough was often mixed by hand, shaped on worn counters, and baked in cast iron. The rhythm of making them passed from mother to daughter like a blessing. Sweet potato biscuits were proof that sweetness could come from struggle, that even the humblest harvest could rise high in the oven and on the heart. They fed not just the body but the spirit, turning hardship into hope with every tender bite. Butter beans cooked with ham hock and served in small cups became hearty appetizers that filled hungry children before dinner, their creamy texture and smoky flavor creating comfort in every spoonful. Grandmothers would simmer dried butter beans with ham hocks, onions, and seasonings for hours until the beans became tender and creamy while absorbing the smoky, salty flavor from the meat. The finished beans were served in small portions in cups or bowls with small spoons, allowing guests to enjoy them without needing plates. Some families topped the beans with crumbled cornbread or a drizzle of hot sauce for extra flavor and texture. In Black households during the 1970s, butter beans represented soul food tradition brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food could honor heritage while fitting modern entertaining formats. Children loved butter beans because they tasted familiar and comforting, like Thanksgiving dinner in miniature form that warmed them from the inside. Fried praline sweet potato casserole elevated humble yams into something so decadent that guests forgot it was technically a side dish. Black mothers roasted sweet potatoes whole until their sugars caramelized, never boiling them because that made them watery. The roasted flesh was mashed with butter, brown sugar, eggs, vanilla, and the secret ingredient, bourbon that enhanced without announcing itself. The mixture went into a buttered dish, but the glory lived in the topping. Pecans chopped fine and coarse, combined with brown sugar, flour, melted butter, and cayenne that made the sweetness interesting. Some families added crushed cornflakes for crunch. The casserole baked until the topping bubbled and crisped, creating a shell that had to be cracked with a serving spoon. This wasn't the marshmallow-topped version white families made. This was sophisticated and complex. Mothers guarded the bourbon and cayenne secret because those touches separated their casserole from everyone else's. Buttermilk cornbread pudding was the sweet ending to a long day's work, born from the habit of never wasting a crumb. Leftover cornbread was crumbled into a pan, soaked in buttermilk, sugar, and a few eggs, then baked until golden and bubbling at the edges. The result was soft and custardy, rich with tang and sweetness. Families who had little turned this into something extraordinary, a dessert that cost almost nothing but tasted like a celebration. Served warm with a drizzle of syrup or a spoon of butter, it filled the room with quiet joy. The flavor was simple, but the feeling was grand. Buttermilk cornbread pudding showed that the same bread that fed you through hard times could also bring comfort when the world finally slowed down. It was thrift turned into tenderness, poverty turned into pride, and warmth turned into sweetness. Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully, then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Cracklin' cornbread was the sound and scent of Southern celebration, simple, hearty, and alive with flavor. The batter began with cornmeal, salt, and buttermilk, stirred smooth before being folded around handfuls of crispy pork cracklings, those golden bits left from rendering lard. When poured into a sizzling iron skillet, the mixture hissed and popped, the edges browning fast while the center baked tender and fragrant. The smell filled every corner of the house, smoke, salt, and sweetness in harmony. Pulled hot from the oven, it was sliced thick and served with cane syrup or honey, sometimes alongside collards or field peas. Every bite carried the crunch of the cracklings, the warmth of corn, and the satisfaction of something made from almost nothing. At Christmas, this cornbread became a feast in itself. Simple food transformed into comfort and pride. Cracklin' cornbread was more than a dish. It was tradition sizzling in a skillet, a golden link between the past and the present, proof that flavor could rise from thrift and care. Neck bones and potatoes simmered on back burners throughout Sunday mornings, where economy and flavor found perfect balance in Harlem kitchens. Pork neck bones were browned first to develop fond, then slow-cooked with water, onions, garlic, and seasonings until meat became tender enough to slip from the bone easily. Potatoes were added during the last hour, cut into chunks that absorbed the porky, slightly gelatinous broth until they tasted like concentrated comfort food. Families bought neck bones cheaply from butchers who sold them as scraps, not realizing they were handing over flavorful cuts with incredible depth. Mothers stretched these bones across multiple meals, serving meat and potatoes Sunday, with leftover broth becoming Monday soup for the family. Children learned to pick every shred from the small bones, wasting nothing at all. This wasn't fancy food, but honest, filling fare that carried the wisdom of generations, who knew careful cooking transformed the cheapest ingredients into something families genuinely craved. Homemade eggless spice cake was a miracle of thrift that still felt like celebration. Born in kitchens where butter and eggs were luxuries, this cake relied on molasses, oil, and water to bind the batter, with a touch of vinegar to keep it soft and tender. Spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and clove gave it its warmth, filling homes with a smell that felt like comfort itself. The batter, dark as caramel, was poured into square pans and baked slowly until the edges turned crisp and the center rose firm but moist. Once cooled, it was cut into generous squares, sometimes drizzled with syrup or dusted with powdered sugar if the pantry allowed. Its flavor was deep, earthy, rich, and faintly smoky from the molasses, offering satisfaction that lasted far beyond the last bite. This was a cake that belonged to the people who knew how to turn less into more, who understood that celebration didn't depend on plenty, but on persistence. During Christmas, it was shared freely, sent to neighbors, or served beside hot coffee after long days of work and worship. Every crumb spoke of community, creativity, and quiet resilience. The eggless spice cake may have been born from scarcity, but it became a dessert of dignity, a testament to the sweetness that endures through hardship. Giblet gravy over rice was one of those dinners that showed how nothing went to waste in the kitchen. Chicken was expensive, but the innards, the gizzard, liver, and heart, were cheap or sometimes even given away by butchers. My grandmother chopped them small, simmered them in broth, and thickened the pot into a rich gravy that smelled like Sunday supper. Poured over rice, it became hearty enough to stretch across the whole family. The rice soaked up the flavor, turning a small handful of giblets into a meal that fed 6 mouths without complaint. Some children turned up their noses at first, but hunger taught quick appreciation, and the taste of the gravy was strong, savory, and full of life. She said, "Giblet gravy was proof that dignity came not from the cut of meat, but from the hands that prepared it." In the 1960s, this dish carried people through lean nights, filling bowls with warmth when little else could be afforded. Giblet gravy over rice was frugality turned into something satisfying. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries. Cinnamon-spiked red velvet cake was Christmas tradition that separated real bakers from box mix pretenders. Black mothers made this from scratch using cocoa powder, buttermilk, and red food coloring. But the secret was ground cinnamon stirred into the batter, just enough to add warmth without announcing itself. The cake was light and tender, with subtle chocolate flavor that let the cream cheese frosting shine. That frosting was made with real cream cheese, butter, and powdered sugar, beaten until fluffy. Some families added pecans, others kept it smooth, but everyone agreed that cream cheese frosting from a can was an insult. The three-layer cake was assembled with generous frosting between each layer, then covered completely until no red showed. It was refrigerated overnight so the flavors could marry and the cake could firm up. The cinnamon addition stayed secret because it was subtle but essential, creating complexity that made people wonder what made this red velvet different from all others. Hog maw and cabbage was the kind of meal that turned survival into something soulful. Made from the pig's stomach, cleaned and stuffed or stewed with greens, onions, and cabbage, it stretched humble ingredients into abundance. Every step took patience, washing, boiling, seasoning, but the result was rich and filling, flavored with the smokiness of salt meat and the sweetness of long cooking. It wasn't fancy, but it fed a crowd, especially during the Christmas season when families gathered in small homes with big appetites. The cabbage soaked up every bit of flavor, soft and savory, while the hog maw added a chew that reminded everyone of the work behind each bite. Dishes like this were born of necessity but shaped by love, created by hands that refused to let anything go to waste. Hog maw and cabbage wasn't just dinner. It was a celebration of endurance, thrift, and the beauty of making do. Smothered cabbage with bacon drippings transformed humble vegetables into something families actually craved on Sunday tables throughout Harlem apartments and brownstones. A whole head of cabbage was cored and cut into thick wedges, then browned in rendered bacon fat until the edges caramelized and turned slightly sweet with concentrated flavor. Onions were added along with a splash of water. Then the pot was covered tightly and allowed to steam until the cabbage became silky tender throughout every layer. The bacon drippings provided richness that made the vegetables taste almost meaty, while the natural sugars in the cabbage intensified through the slow cooking process. This dish cost nearly nothing since cabbage was cheap year-round and bacon fat was saved from every breakfast without exception. It appeared alongside every Sunday meat as an essential part of the meal that nobody would dare skip. Chicken liver pâté spread on crackers created rich, smooth bites that adventurous children tried, the creamy texture and distinctive flavor introducing them to foods that felt grown-up and sophisticated. Aunties would sauté chicken livers with onions and butter until cooked through but still slightly pink inside, then blend them with cream cheese, spices, and sometimes brandy or sherry until smooth. The pâté was chilled in molds or ramekins, then unmolded onto serving platters surrounded by crackers and garnished with chopped parsley or capers. The texture was silky smooth while the flavor was rich and slightly metallic in that characteristic liver way that some loved and others found challenging. In Black households during the 1970s, chicken liver pâté represented culinary sophistication, recipes borrowed from French cuisine and adapted to Southern ingredients. Children who tried it felt brave and grown up, stepping outside their comfort zones to taste foods their parents enjoyed at special gatherings. Rum raisin bread pudding used up leftover bread while tasting more luxurious than fresh-baked cake. Black mothers soaked raisins in dark rum for 3 days before Christmas, letting them plump and absorb alcohol. Stale bread, white bread, Hawaiian rolls, leftover cornbread was cubed and dried overnight. The custard combined eggs, heavy cream, whole milk, vanilla, cinnamon, and nutmeg, with extra yolks for richness. The secret was condensed milk, which added sweetness and created texture that wasn't quite custard, wasn't quite cake. The bread soaked in custard for an hour, absorbing every drop, then was folded with rum-soaked raisins and dotted with butter. It baked low and slow until the top crisped while the inside stayed creamy. The finishing touch was rum butter sauce. Butter, brown sugar, cream, and more rum, poured over warm servings. This appeared only at Christmas because the rum expense and 3-day preparation meant it was saved for the year's most important meal. Collard greens with ham hocks were the soul of Christmas cooking long before anyone called it soul food. A pot of greens simmered all day on the stove, the smoky meat from leftover ham bones slowly melting into the broth. Each leaf softened into silk, soaking up the flavor of salt, smoke, and thyme. The rich scent wrapped itself around the house, promising something steady and strong. Collards were more than food. They were ritual. On Christmas Day, they stood for good fortune, health, and survival. Every family had their own way, a pinch of pepper here, a spoon of vinegar there, each pot telling a story passed down in taste, not words. When served with cornbread to soak up the potlikker, the meal became a full blessing. Collard greens and ham hocks fed more than hunger. They fed heritage. Cracklin' bread brought satisfying crunch of rendered pork fat into cornbread that elevated simple bread for Harlem families who remembered Southern traditions. Pork skin was rendered slowly until it became crispy cracklins, those golden bits of fat and skin that shattered between teeth. These cracklins were folded into cornbread batter made from stone-ground cornmeal and buttermilk. The bread baked in preheated cast iron, its bottom developing the crusty layer that separated good cornbread from great. Each bite delivered corn sweetness interrupted by pockets of salty, crunchy pork, releasing fat when bitten. This bread accompanied every Sunday meal, used to soak up potlikker, gravy, and bean juice alike. Cracklin' bread represented complete utilization of the hog that defined African American cooking. Families passed this recipe through generations without writing it down, each cook adjusting by feel. Best eaten hot when cracklins still maintained crunch. Boiled sweet potatoes with butter drizzle were the purest expression of comfort. Simple, sweet, and shining with care. Peeled and simmered in iron pots until tender enough to yield to a fork, the potatoes were laid out on chipped plates, their golden orange flesh glowing in the candlelight of small kitchens. Melted butter, or sometimes a spoonful of cane syrup, was poured over the top, pooling into every crevice until the air smelled like warmth itself. This was food that required no recipe, only attention and love. It was eaten slowly, savored between conversation and quiet gratitude. For families with little, it was proof that nourishment didn't need extravagance. On Christmas, these potatoes sat beside greens or salt pork, turning a humble table into something sacred. The taste was gentle but lasting, sweetness that came not from sugar, but from care. In every soft bite was a reminder that generosity could be found even in simplicity, and that joy could live in the plainest meal. Boiled sweet potatoes with butter were not grand, but they were grace itself made edible. Grease gravy rice was what people cooked when they refused to let anything go to waste. When breakfast meats were done frying, the leftover grease became treasure. A spoon of flour went in first, sizzling and popping until it turned golden. Then milk or water got poured in, slow and steady, until it thickened into smooth gravy. That hot gravy poured over white rice made something out of nearly nothing. It was salty, creamy, and smoky all at once. The smell filled the house and the taste filled the stomach. Parents called it breakfast, but it could carry a family through an entire day. It came from kitchens that knew survival like a second language, where flavor was earned from thrift and patience. Kids grew up thinking it was comfort food, not knowing it was born from rationing and struggle. Grease gravy rice was more than a recipe. It was a declaration that no meal was too small to matter. Every bite was a promise that the family would eat, even when times were lean. It was humble food that carried pride on a spoon. Fried chicken wings with hot sauce and butter created sticky, finger-licking appetizers that had children lined up before dinner was announced, their crispy exteriors giving way to tender meat falling off the bone. Families prepared massive batches on Thanksgiving morning, seasoning them with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, before dredging in flour and dropping into cast-iron skillets filled with bubbling hot oil. The wings fried until golden brown and crackling crisp, filling kitchens with aromas that drew everyone from every corner. Once drained and still hot, wings were tossed in melted butter and hot sauce, the heat always bold and spicy. In the 1970s, Black households, these wings represented abundance, showing guests everyone was welcome to eat their fill. Children loved them because they were handheld, required no utensils, and delivered maximum flavor with every bite. Hoppin' John with collards was New Year's Eve tradition that started at Christmas dinner as a promise of good fortune. Black mothers cooked black-eyed peas with rice, smoked ham hocks, onions, and the secret addition of tomato paste that added depth without announcing itself. The peas simmered until tender, then rice was stirred in to absorb the flavorful broth. Collard greens were served alongside, their potlikker mixing with the Hoppin' John on the plate. The combination represented prosperity: peas for coins, greens for paper money. Some families added hot sauce, others preferred vinegar, but the tomato paste stayed universal. The dish was eaten at midnight on New Year's Eve, ensuring the coming year would bring financial blessing. Mothers made extra because leftovers were considered lucky to eat throughout January. The tomato paste addition stayed secret because it created umami that most people couldn't identify but definitely tasted. Salmon croquettes served as mini appetizers were crispy golden patties that children devoured while standing in kitchens, their hands reaching for more before finishing what they were already eating. Grandmothers would drain cans of pink salmon, carefully picking through the meat to remove bones and skin, then flaking the fish into mixing bowls where it was combined with chopped onions, bell peppers, beaten eggs, cornmeal, and seasonings. The mixture was shaped into small patties, pressed firmly to ensure they held together, then carefully lowered into hot oil where they sizzled and turned golden brown. The exterior developed a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. In 1970s, Black households' salmon croquettes were economical elegance, transforming canned fish into something special worthy of holiday tables. Children loved them because they were handheld, didn't require forks, and packed protein and flavor into every crispy bite. Homemade molasses taffy pulls were less about candy and more about connection. On Christmas night, when the chores were done and the fire glowed low, families gathered around iron pots bubbling with dark, fragrant molasses. The syrup was boiled to just the right stage, then poured onto buttered pans to cool until it could be handled. Everyone, from the youngest to the oldest, took a turn pulling the sticky taffy, stretching, twisting, and folding it until it turned from brown to golden, smooth and glossy. The sound of laughter mixed with the crackle of the fire, and the sweet smell filled the room. It was a game, a treat, and a ritual all in one. Fingers stuck together, faces glowed, and worries melted away for a while. When finished, the taffy was rolled into ropes or small candies, wrapped in wax paper, and saved for later or given to neighbors. Molasses taffy pulls were more than sweets. They were the taste of togetherness and joy made by hand. Candied yams with marshmallows appeared on Harlem holiday tables where families wanted something special that children would actually eat without complaint or any negotiation at all. Sweet potatoes were parboiled until just tender, sliced thick, and layered in baking dishes with brown sugar, butter, cinnamon, and vanilla until the syrup became thick and gloriously glossy from caramelization. Marshmallows were added in the final minutes of baking, browning under the broiler until they turned golden and slightly charred at the peaks beautifully. The dish was impossibly sweet, almost dessert, but served alongside savory dishes in the way Southern tradition always demanded it be. Families argued whether marshmallows were authentic or modern innovation, but children didn't care about such debates at all. The combination of caramelized sweet potato, melted butter, and toasted marshmallow created flavors that made vegetables acceptable to even the pickiest young eaters at the table. Stuffed celery with cream cheese and pimento created colorful boats that children picked up by their crunchy handles, the creamy filling contrasting perfectly with the crisp, fresh vegetable that provided texture amidst holiday indulgence. Mothers would wash and trim celery stalks, cutting them into 3-inch lengths before drying them thoroughly and arranging them on serving platters like little canoes. The filling was made by beating cream cheese until fluffy, then folding in diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings like garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper. The cream cheese mixture was spread generously into each celery groove, mounded slightly and sometimes garnished with paprika, chopped olives, or crispy bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, stuffed celery represented an attempt to include something fresh among heavier holiday offerings. Children loved them because the cream cheese provided richness while celery added refreshing crunch. Triple chocolate chess pie combined Southern tradition with chocolate decadence, creating a dessert so rich that small slices satisfied. Black mothers started with homemade pie crust made with lard, blind baked until golden. The filling was classic chess pie: eggs, sugar, butter, vinegar, and cornmeal, but transformed with 3 chocolates: cocoa powder whisked into sugar, melted bittersweet chocolate folded into eggs, and chocolate chips scattered across the crust. The secret was using buttermilk instead of regular milk, which reacted with chocolate to create brownie-like fudginess while maintaining chess pie's crisp top. Vanilla and espresso powder deepened the chocolate. The pie baked until the center barely wobbled, then cooled where it set into something between custard and fudge. The top crackled when pressed, giving way to dense chocolate richness. This appeared only at Christmas because chocolate was expensive. Mothers kept the triple chocolate technique and buttermilk secret. Sweet rice pudding with raisins was Christmas comfort at its most gentle, a dessert born from thrift and turned into grace. Leftover rice was simmered again in milk until creamy, with sugar, butter, and cinnamon stirred in to bring it to life. Plump raisins softened in the heat, releasing their sweetness into the mixture, while the scent of nutmeg or vanilla filled the air. The pudding thickened slowly, stirred by careful hands that had learned to measure not with cups, but with instinct. Served warm in simple bowls, it was dessert that asked for quiet, for gratitude, for the slow savoring of every spoonful. It tasted of simplicity, of love that didn't shout but lingered softly. For children, it was a treat. For elders, a memory. Sweet rice pudding was more than a way to use what was left. It was proof that comfort could come from the smallest acts of care. In every creamy bite lived peace, patience, and home. Blackberry cobbler without sugar proved that fruit's natural sweetness could create desserts when refined sugar wasn't available. Wild blackberries grew abundantly along fence lines and in abandoned fields, free for anyone willing to brave thorns and summer heat to pick them. Black families sent children out with buckets, returning with purple-stained hands and enough berries to make cobblers that lasted days. The berries were cooked down until their juices concentrated, natural sugars intensifying without any additions. Simple biscuit dough made from flour, lard, and buttermilk was dropped over the bubbling fruit, then baked until golden. The result was tart and intense, less sweet than modern desserts, but deeply satisfying in ways sugar-laden versions never achieve. These cobblers appeared at church socials and family gatherings, proof that celebration didn't require money. Women competed quietly over whose cobbler turned out best, pride coming from skill rather than expensive ingredients. The practice of picking wild berries taught children about seasons, patience, and finding abundance in nature with steadfast pride. Rumaki wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered. the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better. Sweet potato biscuits with cane syrup were Christmas breakfast tradition that turned leftover sweet potatoes into something special. Black mothers mashed roasted sweet potatoes, then mixed them into biscuit dough with buttermilk, butter, and just enough flour to make the dough workable. The secret was adding a tablespoon of honey to the dough, which enhanced the sweet potatoes' natural sweetness. The biscuits were tender and slightly sweet, their orange color making them festive. They were served hot with butter and cane syrup drizzled over top, the syrup's molasses notes complementing the sweet potatoes perfectly. These biscuits appeared on Christmas morning alongside eggs, sausage, and grits, their sweetness balancing savory breakfast foods. Children especially loved them because they tasted almost like dessert. The honey addition stayed secret because it was the difference between good sweet potato biscuits and extraordinary ones. Turkey necks and rice gravy made sure no part of the bird went to waste. Once the holiday turkey had been carved, the necks were simmered down with onions, celery, and a touch of flour until the broth thickened into a dark, flavorful gravy. Poured over rice, it became a meal in itself, simple, filling, and rich with comfort. The meat from the necks was tender, sliding off the bone like butter, and the gravy carried every bit of the bird's essence. In many homes, this dish was the quiet favorite, eaten the day after the feast when the celebration slowed but the warmth remained. It was food for resting hearts and tired hands, the kind that made you close your eyes after a long meal. Turkey necks and rice gravy turned leftovers into love, teaching that nothing was ever too small to be savored. Miniature cornbread muffins with honey butter were golden gems that children popped into their mouths whole, the crumbly cornbread texture melting while sweet honey butter added richness. Mothers would prepare cornbread batter using stone-ground cornmeal, flour, eggs, buttermilk, and just enough sugar to balance the corn's natural earthiness, then spoon it into mini muffin tins that baked quickly. The muffins emerged from ovens with crispy, slightly caramelized tops and tender, crumbly interiors that begged to be broken open and slathered with butter. Honey butter was made by whipping softened butter with honey until fluffy and smooth, creating a spread that melted instantly when slathered on hot muffins. In the 1970s, Black households, these miniature cornbread muffins represented Southern hospitality in bite-sized form. Children loved them because they were individually portioned, making them feel like special treats rather than ordinary bread, and the sweet honey butter made every bite feel indulgent and special. Brandied cranberry orange relish was the condiment that made store-bought cranberry sauce look like a joke. Black mothers made this weeks in advance with fresh cranberries that popped and burst as they cooked with sugar, orange juice, and zest. The secret was cooking them just until they broke down but still had texture, never letting them turn to mush. Once cooled, the relish was spiked with good brandy, enough to taste clearly but not be boozy, plus crystallized ginger chopped fine for heat. Some families added chopped pecans, others used golden raisins plumped in the brandy first. The relish was stored in glass jars where the alcohol preserved it and flavors melded into something more complex. By Christmas, it had transformed, sweet, tangy, warm, with brandy depth that paired perfectly with turkey and ham. Mothers guarded the brandy ratio and crystallized ginger addition because these made their relish memorable. Guests asked for the recipe every year, and every year mothers said it was just cranberries. Pimento cheese pinwheels made with tortillas spread with creamy pimento cheese and rolled into tight spirals created colorful, easy-to-eat bites that children grabbed enthusiastically. Aunties would spread flour tortillas with homemade pimento cheese made from sharp cheddar, cream cheese, diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings. The tortillas were then rolled tightly into logs, wrapped in plastic wrap, and refrigerated for several hours to firm up and make slicing easier. Once chilled, the logs were unwrapped and sliced into rounds about half an inch thick, each pinwheel revealing the bright orange cheese dotted with red pimento pieces. In 1970s, Black households' pimento cheese pinwheels represented modern entertaining, a variation on traditional pimento cheese that made serving easier and more elegant. Children loved pimento cheese pinwheels because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and tasted like their favorite spread in a fun new format. 7-layer caramel cake was the crown jewel that appeared only at Christmas, taking 2 full days to complete. Black mothers baked 7 thin yellow layers that had to be perfectly even, then made caramel frosting from scratch by cooking sugar until amber, adding cream at precisely the right moment. The frosting required constant stirring and a candy thermometer, with temperatures mattering more than oven settings. Each layer was brushed with vanilla syrup, then stacked with warm caramel between, assembled while the frosting was still workable. The finished cake stood 8 inches tall with a glossy shell that cracked beautifully when sliced. Grandmothers made this cake, aunties made this cake, but the recipe stayed locked in memory, never written down. It was shared only with daughters who'd proven themselves patient enough to stand at the stove for hours. The cake represented legacy, the kind of food that announced a woman's mastery and her commitment to making Christmas extraordinary. Sweet potato pone carried dessert traditions from plantation kitchens into Harlem apartments where Sunday dinners demanded something sweet to finish the meal properly. Grated raw sweet potatoes were mixed with molasses, butter, eggs, and warming spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and ginger until batter became thick and fragrant. The mixture was poured into heavy dishes and cooked slowly until the top caramelized into a dark, candy-like crust while the interior stayed moist and dense throughout. This wasn't fluffy sweet potato pie, but something more ancient and substantial, connected directly to African cooking traditions that persisted through generations. Families served pone warm with cream or cold the next morning as breakfast that satisfied deeply. The dish required no expensive ingredients, just patience and a hot oven kept at the right temperature. Children scraped bowls clean, fighting over caramelized edges that had gone slightly crispy against the pan. Sweet potato pone represented survival transformed into celebration. Churned milk soup was what you made when you had finished making butter and still needed a meal. That leftover buttermilk became the base for a tangy, hearty soup that could feed a family from a single pot. It was mixed with cornmeal, herbs, and whatever vegetables were on hand, then simmered until it thickened like velvet. The smell was sharp but cozy, filling the kitchen with warmth and familiarity. Some families dropped bits of bread into the bowl, letting it soak up the flavor. It was simple food, born from old farm routines and frugal wisdom. Churned milk soup taught that nothing should ever be wasted, not even the scraps of a good day's work. It soothed hunger and reminded everyone that comfort could come from the most ordinary things. With each spoonful, it carried the echo of laughter and work from generations before. Pickled shrimp marinated in vinegar, oil, and spices created tangy, flavorful bites that adventurous children tried. The cold, tender shrimp infused with herbs and aromatics that made them taste complex. Aunties would boil shrimp until just cooked, then peel them and place them in jars or bowls where they were covered with a marinade of vinegar, oil, sliced onions, bay leaves, peppercorns, and sometimes lemon slices. The shrimp marinated for at least 24 hours, absorbing the tangy, aromatic flavors and developing a pickled taste that was both refreshing and sophisticated. The marinated shrimp were served cold with toothpicks for easy serving, the onions and bay leaves removed or left in depending on family preference. In Black households during the 1970s, pickled shrimp represented make-ahead convenience, appetizers that actually improved with time. Children who tried pickled shrimp discovered seafood could be tangy and bright. Fruitcake soaked in rum was the Christmas tradition that separated good fruitcake from the jokes everyone made about bad fruitcake. Black mothers started this cake in November, giving it time to age properly. The cake was dense with candied fruit, cherries, pineapple, citrus peel, and chopped pecans, bound together with spiced batter. The secret was soaking the fruit in rum for a week before baking, letting it plump and absorb alcohol. After baking, the cake was wrapped in rum-soaked cheesecloth, then wrapped again in foil and stored in a tin. Every week until Christmas, the cloth was unwrapped and more rum was brushed over the cake, building flavor and moisture. By Christmas, the cake was dark, dense, and intensely flavored, nothing like the dry, tasteless versions people complained about. It was sliced thin and served with coffee, a little piece going a long way. The weekly rum basting stayed secret because it required patience and attention that most people wouldn't commit to. Field peas and rice, better known as Hoppin' John, was more than a meal. It was a wish cooked into being. On the surface, it was simple. Black-eyed peas simmered slowly with onions, a bit of salt pork or ham hock for flavor, and spooned generously over rice. But each ingredient carried meaning. The peas stood for coins, the rice for abundance, and if greens were added, they symbolized wealth and growth in the new year to come. Families believed that eating it on Christmas or New Year's Day would bring luck, but it was the taste, smoky, earthy, and deeply satisfying, that made it beloved. The scent of simmering peas filled the home long before the first bowl was served. It was cheap to make but rich in comfort, a dish that turned thrift into celebration. For those who had little, it offered the promise of more. For those who had plenty, it was a reminder of humility. Hoppin' John was food that bridged hope and hunger, linking every year to the next with a spoonful of faith. Liver pudding on toast was Sunday morning protein in Harlem households where waste-nothing cooking extended to organ meats that others avoided entirely without consideration. Pork liver was ground with seasonings, cornmeal, and spices, then formed into loaves that could be sliced and fried as needed throughout the week. The slices sizzled in hot skillets until the exterior crisped, while the interior stayed soft and almost spreadable on the toast. Served on toasted bread with hot sauce and raw onions, it provided iron-rich protein that fueled working bodies through long days of labor. The taste was distinctly livery, but mellowed by the cornmeal and spices that balanced its natural intensity beautifully. Children either loved or hated liver pudding with no middle ground possible. Families who ate it considered it essential sustenance, while others couldn't understand the appeal. This dish represented complete utilization of the hog. Stewed okra and tomatoes brought the memory of summer into the chill of winter kitchens. When gardens lay bare and fresh produce was only a memory, jars of okra and tomatoes, carefully canned during warm months, were pulled from shelves like treasures. They were simmered together with onions, peppers, and sometimes a touch of bacon grease, bubbling until the stew thickened into something rich and comforting. The okra's gentle stickiness turned the tomatoes silky, giving the dish its signature texture, smooth, savory, and full of life. The color alone, deep red mixed with green, was enough to make a table feel festive, like Christmas painted in food. Served beside rice or a slice of cornbread, it warmed bellies and spirits alike. Stewed okra and tomatoes was never about luxury. It was about wisdom, about saving the best of the earth and making it last. Each spoonful was the taste of sunlight captured in a jar, a promise that even in the coldest season, the memory of warmth and work could live on through food. Fish head stew was a dish born out of necessity, yet it carried surprising depth and flavor. Fish heads, often discarded by others, were simmered slowly with onions, potatoes, and rice until they yielded every ounce of richness to the broth. My grandmother insisted the heads made the stew better than fillets, providing body and nourishment that nothing else could. The bones and skin flavored the liquid until it turned hearty and comforting. Potatoes stretched the meal, rice thickened it, and vegetables added substance, turning scraps into a filling supper. The taste was strong, earthy, and unforgettable, reminding everyone that no part of food should go unused. For Black families in the 1960s, fish head stew was a common way to stretch the catch of the day, ensuring nothing went to waste. It became a lesson in thrift and gratitude, proof that survival demanded creativity. Fish head stew was both humble and mighty, sustaining families through lean times with flavor and tradition. Cocktail sausages wrapped in flaky biscuit dough emerged from ovens as golden crescents that children grabbed from cooling racks, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Mothers would roll out refrigerated biscuit dough, cutting it into strips before wrapping each small sausage like a tiny gift and arranging them on greased baking sheets. The wrapped sausages baked until the dough turned golden brown and flaky, the fat from the sausages creating pockets of rich, meaty flavor. Some families brushed the tops with melted butter and sesame seeds before baking, adding extra richness and subtle, nutty crunch. In Black households during the 1970s, these sausage rolls appeared at every major holiday, their ease of preparation making them perfect for busy cooks managing multiple dishes. Children loved them because they were small, portable, and perfectly sized for little hands. Lye hominy was ancient food, made by soaking dried corn in lye water until the kernels swelled and their hulls loosened. Black mothers learned this process from indigenous peoples and African traditions, creating food that was more nutritious than regular corn. The process began with making lye from wood ashes, then soaking field corn for days until the kernels transformed into pale, ghostly white hominy. After rinsing away all traces of lye, the hominy was boiled until tender. The taste was earthy and slightly mineral, with a chewy texture that satisfied hunger like nothing else. In the 1920s, hominy appeared regularly on Black tables because it turned cheap field corn into something substantial. Mothers fried hominy in bacon grease for breakfast, creating crispy cakes that children ate with molasses. They stewed it with meat for dinner. Lye hominy represented knowledge passed through generations, showing that food preparation was both science and art. The technique has mostly disappeared, replaced by canned hominy that lacks the texture of the hand-processed original. Pig's feet with vinegar sauce were not for the impatient or the faint-hearted. They demanded long hours of boiling and careful cleaning before the meat turned silky soft and rich with flavor. For many families, this dish represented endurance itself, transforming what others threw away into a delicacy that filled the soul. The vinegar cut through the heaviness, adding a tang that woke the taste buds and stretched the appetite. When cooked just right, the gelatin shimmered, thickening the sauce and coating every tender bite. Pig's feet weren't glamorous, but they were honest. They told the truth about survival, about making something from nearly nothing and taking pride in it. Around tables, they sparked stories and laughter, the kind only shared by people who'd known struggle and joy in equal measure. The smell of that vinegar sauce carried through neighborhoods like a promise that good eating didn't need riches. It reminded everyone that patience, thrift, and skill could turn even the roughest ingredients into a dish worthy of celebration. Pig's feet with vinegar sauce were a triumph of flavor and faith, proof that nothing worth keeping ever comes easy. Fried fatback with gravy was the breakfast that started Christmas morning with sizzle and salt. Thin strips of cured pork belly were fried until crisp, their edges curling in the hot skillet. The drippings were saved, always saved, and whisked with flour and milk to make a rich, creamy gravy poured over biscuits or rice. It was the taste of indulgence in a world that rarely offered much of it. The crackle of the fatback and the smell of the gravy meant that Christmas had truly begun. Children gathered close, watching the pan and waiting for their turn, while grown folks shared stories of the year gone by. Fatback might have been scraps to some, but to those who knew its worth, it was a feast in itself. Every crisp bite and creamy spoonful told a story of pride, patience, and Southern ingenuity. Chicken salad stuffed in cherry tomatoes created colorful, bite-sized portions that children eagerly grabbed. The cool, creamy chicken salad contrasting with the fresh, slightly tart tomato cups that held everything together. Aunties would hollow out cherry tomatoes using small spoons or melon ballers, creating little edible bowls that were functional and beautiful when arranged on serving platters. The chicken salad was made from finely chopped cooked chicken mixed with mayonnaise, diced celery, sweet pickle relish, and seasonings. The mixture kept cold until serving time. Each hollowed tomato was filled with a generous spoonful of chicken salad, mounded slightly on top for visual appeal. In 1970s Black households, these stuffed tomatoes represented creativity and presentation. transforming simple ingredients into appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and combined familiar flavors in a fun format. Great-grandmother's coconut cake was a 3-layer monument to coconut in every form. Black mothers baked white cake layers flavored with coconut milk, giving them moisture that lasted through New Year's. The frosting was genuine boiled icing, sugar, corn syrup, and egg whites beaten while hot syrup drizzled in, creating something between frosting and marshmallow. The secret was the coconut preparation. Fresh coconut was grated, then toasted until golden and fragrant, mixed with sweetened flaked coconut for texture. Between each layer went coconut cream filling, thick and custardy. The assembled cake was covered in boiled frosting, then pressed with handfuls of toasted coconut until no white showed. It was refrigerated overnight so flavors could meld, resulting in cake so moist it melted on your tongue. This recipe stayed secret because it required genuine skill and patience. Store-bought frosting wouldn't work, and rushing the boiled icing meant failure. Molasses candied yams were sweetened by patience, not plenty. When refined sugar was too dear, families reached for homemade molasses or sorghum syrup to coat slices of sweet potato until they glistened like amber. The yams simmered slow in cast-iron skillets, bubbling under a glaze that filled the kitchen with a smell deep as memory. They were tender, caramelized at the edges, and sticky enough to make every bite feel like dessert and blessing at once. Molasses brought something that sugar never could, a smoky sweetness that felt ancient, earthy, and whole. These yams were served alongside meat if there was any, or eaten plain from a spoon when there wasn't. They were comfort, made from soil and struggle alike, proof that sweetness could be drawn from even the hardest ground. In every spoonful was history cooked down to syrup and flame. Succotash with lima beans and corn united 2 ingredients that Native Americans first combined and African American cooks adopted as their own over many generations. Fresh lima beans were simmered until tender, then combined with corn kernels cut fresh from the cob in a pot with butter and a splash of cream when available. The vegetables were cooked together until the starches released and created a naturally thick, creamy consistency without any flour or thickeners. Salt and pepper were the only seasonings needed since the vegetables provided enough flavor on their own merits without embellishment. Bacon was sometimes added for smokiness, but the dish worked perfectly without meat for meatless days. Succotash appeared on Sunday tables year-round, made with dried limas and canned corn in winter when fresh wasn't available. The combination provided complete plant protein. This dish represented cultural exchange that created uniquely American food. Fried okra rounds served with ranch dressing were crispy, crunchy appetizers that introduced children to vegetables in ways that made them forget they were eating something healthy, the golden coating making every bite feel like a treat. Mothers would slice fresh okra into thick rounds, coating them first in buttermilk that helped breading adhere, then dredging them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. The okra rounds were dropped into hot oil where they bubbled and crisped, the cornmeal coating turning golden brown while the okra inside stayed tender. Once drained on paper towels and sprinkled with extra salt while still hot, the okra was piled into serving bowls and placed near small dishes of ranch dressing that children dunked them into with enthusiasm. In Black households during the 1970s, fried okra represented Southern tradition meeting holiday hospitality. Children loved fried okra because it felt like eating fried chicken in vegetable form. Persimmon seed coffee emerged when imported beans were rare or too costly for enslaved communities. Wild persimmons dropped their fruit in autumn, and the hard seeds inside were washed, dried, and roasted until dark and fragrant. Ground and steeped in hot water, they produced a warm, nutty beverage with no caffeine but plenty of comfort on cold mornings. This practice carried forward after the Civil War, especially during wartime shortages when coffee imports faltered again. Families across the South roasted persimmon seeds alongside chicory or other local substitutes, proving the durability of this inventive method. The gentle flavor and toasty aroma made it a beloved alternative long after necessity faded. Today, a few heritage festivals still brew persimmon seed coffee to honor the ingenuity of those who first discovered its rich taste. The drink reminds us that creativity in the face of scarcity can yield traditions that outlast the circumstances that gave birth to them, turning survival into a legacy of flavor and resilience. Sausage balls made with breakfast sausage, cheese, and biscuit mix, baked into savory spheres that children popped into their mouths like candy, their crispy exteriors giving way to soft, cheesy, slightly spicy interiors. Mothers would combine raw breakfast sausage with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and dry biscuit mix, kneading everything together until well combined. The mixture was then rolled into balls about an inch in diameter, arranged on baking sheets with space between them, and baked until golden brown. As they baked, the fat from the sausage rendered while the cheese melted, creating savory, flavorful bites that were crispy outside and tender inside. In the 1970s, Black households, sausage balls represented easy entertaining, a recipe that could be made ahead. Children loved sausage balls because they were perfectly portioned, required no utensils, and delivered breakfast flavors in snackable form. Cane syrup popcorn balls were Christmas joy shaped by hand, sweet and sticky in a world where candy was rare and store-bought treats were out of reach. They began with plain popcorn, popped over a hot stove in iron pots that rattled and hissed as kernels burst to life. Each bowl of white puffed corn waited for its golden crown, warm cane syrup poured in slow ribbons, coating every piece until the air smelled of caramel and smoke. Hands greased with butter worked quickly, pressing the sticky mix into balls before it cooled. It was messy work, but the kind that filled the kitchen with laughter and chatter. When the candy hardened, it shone like amber and cracked gently between teeth, sweet enough to make a child's eyes light up. These popcorn balls were handed out after church programs or shared at home on Christmas Eve, small tokens of community and care. They weren't bought from stores. They were made with love, time, and just enough syrup to bind everyone together. Fried green tomatoes were a porch-side favorite, a snack for hot days and easy laughter. Slices of firm green tomatoes were dipped in cornmeal, fried golden in a skillet, and sprinkled with salt while still sizzling. The result was crisp on the outside, soft inside, and just tart enough to make your mouth water. You could eat them standing up, still hot from the pan, or stack them high beside a plate of beans and rice. They were the kind of treat you didn't plan, you just made them when the garden gave too many tomatoes. The pop of oil, the hum of conversation, and the smell of cornmeal frying turned an ordinary afternoon into something special. Kids waited by the stove, stealing pieces when the cook wasn't looking, their fingers burned but happy. Fried green tomatoes weren't just about taste, they were about time, patience, and community. Their taste was bold but humble, a reminder of summers that felt endless and simple pleasures that cost almost nothing. Fried green tomatoes were living proof that good things come to those who cook from the heart. Cheese ball rolled in pecans sat proudly on serving platters surrounded by crackers, its cream cheese base mixed with cheddar, green onions, and seasonings before being shaped into a perfect sphere and coated with chopped pecans. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with shredded sharp cheddar, finely chopped green onions, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes hot sauce for complexity. The mixture was then shaped into a ball or log, wrapped in plastic, and chilled until firm enough to handle. Just before serving, the cheese ball was rolled in finely chopped pecans that created a crunchy, nutty coating contrasting beautifully with the creamy interior. In 1970s Black households, cheese balls represented sophistication and effort, centerpieces of appetizer spreads that showed guests the host had put thought into the gathering. Children loved them because they could spread the cheese themselves onto crackers, feeling grown-up and independent. Honey-glazed cornbread dressing was the side dish guests returned for thirds of, completely different from dry sage-heavy stuffing. Black mothers made their own cornbread in cast iron until dark and crusty, then crumbled it and left it out overnight. The cornbread was mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and the secret trinity, bell peppers that added sweetness and color. The liquid wasn't just broth, but turkey drippings, chicken stock, and the secret addition, Honey stirred into melted butter. Eggs bound it together, sage and thyme added savory depth, but the honey created complexity. Some families added chopped pecans, others stirred in crumbled sausage, but the honey butter mixture was universal. The dressing was spread in deep pans, dotted with butter, and baked until the top crisped while the inside stayed moist. The honey caramelized slightly, creating sweet spots that contrasted with savory richness. Mothers guarded the honey technique because it separated good from unforgettable dressing. Bread pudding with cane syrup was the dessert that proved nothing, not even stale bread, was ever truly lost. Pieces of leftover loaves were soaked in warm milk, beaten eggs, and a heavy drizzle of homemade cane syrup until they softened into something new. The mixture baked slowly, filling the room with a smell deep and sweet enough to make mouths water long before it was ready. Once out of the oven, it was sticky, tender, and golden on top, like sunshine trapped in sugar. For families who could not afford store-bought sweets, this was luxury in a pan. The cane syrup gave it a depth that regular sugar never could, a taste of smoke, soil, and patience. Every bite carried the memory of hands stirring, saving, and savoring. Bread pudding with cane syrup was warmth made edible, a Christmas comfort born straight out of resourcefulness and love. Sugar cane sticks were the simplest kind of sweetness, and they carried a special memory for children who grew up with little. Fresh cane was cut into sticks, peeled, and chewed for its sweet juice, offering a natural candy when refined sugar or store-bought treats were out of reach. For many children in the South, walking home with a stick of sugar cane was as good as holding a chocolate bar. It was affordable, long-lasting, and carried the earthy, raw sweetness of the land itself. Parents loved it because it kept children happy without costing much, and it taught the value of finding joy in small things. Sugar cane sticks carried the reminder that sweetness did not need to come from a store, but from fields worked by hand. They were part of the rhythm of rural life, tied to harvests and family memories. Even in the toughest years, sugar cane sticks brought happiness. Turnip green potlikker soup was the quiet strength of the table, a dish that came not from what was served first, but from what remained after. When the tender greens were eaten, the broth that simmered beneath them, the potlikker, was saved like treasure. It was dark and smoky, heavy with the flavor of ham bones, onions, salt, and earth. Mixed with a bit of cornbread, rice, or stray vegetables, it became a nourishing soup that soothed hunger and offered comfort. In the old days, elders called it liquid gold, rich not in coins, but in care. It carried nutrients, yes, but also a promise that nothing made with love should ever go to waste. During the cold weeks after Christmas, families gathered around small bowls of potlikker, sipping warmth that stretched far beyond its ingredients. Each spoonful was humility and hope combined, a quiet meal that spoke volumes about wisdom and endurance. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens. Black-eyed pea fritters connected Harlem tables directly to West African cooking traditions that survived the Middle Passage and persisted through centuries of adaptation and evolution. Dried black-eyed peas were soaked overnight, skinned by hand, and ground into smooth paste, then seasoned with salt, onions, and hot pepper, before being shaped and deep-fried until golden brown and crispy. The fritters puffed up in hot oil, their exteriors becoming impossibly crispy, while insides stayed creamy and tender throughout. These were street food in Lagos and Accra, but in Harlem they became Sunday appetizers passed around before the main meal arrived at the table. The technique required practice since the paste needed proper consistency and the oil needed exact temperature to achieve perfection. Children grabbed these hot from the draining paper, burning fingers but unable to wait for cooling. This dish represented unbroken culinary connection across oceans and centuries. Fried catfish nuggets brought the river straight to the table, their golden crust glistening like sunlight on water. When meat was too costly and game too scarce, fishing became salvation, and catfish was the prize. Early in the morning, men cast their lines from the banks or small wooden boats, bringing home enough to feed the whole family. The fish were cleaned by hand, each piece dipped in seasoned cornmeal and dropped into a cast-iron pot of hot oil that hissed and popped like music. The smell drifted for miles, warm, salty, and comforting. Once fried, the nuggets were crisp outside, tender within, eaten by the handful or dipped into spicy sauce. For Christmas dinners in riverside towns, this dish replaced turkey, yet no one felt they were missing a thing. It was fresh, familiar, and full of flavor born from work and gratitude. Served with coleslaw or cornbread, it turned even the simplest home into a feast. Fried catfish nuggets weren't just food. They were a symbol of ingenuity, the art of finding plenty in what the land and water offered freely. Every bite carried the taste of resilience and celebration. Oyster dressing was the Christmas tradition for families who lived near water, combining cornbread dressing with briny oysters. Black mothers made cornbread specifically for this, letting it stale overnight before crumbling. The oysters were fresh, shucked that morning, their liquor saved for adding to the dressing. The cornbread was mixed with sautéed celery, onions, bell peppers, and herbs, then moistened with chicken broth and the oyster liquor. The whole oysters were folded in gently so they stayed intact during baking. The secret was adding hot sauce and Worcestershire sauce that enhanced the oysters' brininess without overwhelming them. The dressing baked until golden on top but stayed moist inside, the oysters plump and tender. This dish divided families. Some loved the combination, others couldn't get past the texture. But for oyster dressing families, Christmas wasn't complete without it. The hot sauce and Worcestershire addition stayed secret because balance was everything with oysters. Boiled peanuts in the shell were a southern snack that traveled north with migrating families who couldn't imagine Sunday afternoons without them by their side. Green peanuts fresh from the ground were boiled for hours in heavily salted water until they became soft and almost creamy inside their shells. The texture was nothing like roasted peanuts, but instead soft and legume-like, closer to beans than nuts in every way. Families gathered around pots of boiled peanuts, cracking shells and eating the warm, salty contents while sharing conversation and catching up on the week's events together. The preparation was simple, but the timing mattered because undercooked peanuts stayed hard, while overcooked ones turned mushy and unpleasant. Street vendors in the South sold them from steaming pots, but in Harlem, families made their own when green peanuts could be found at markets. Boiled peanuts represented informal Sunday gatherings and the kind of snacking that brought people together. Cornbread dressing with giblets was the kind of dish that turned thrift into tradition. It started with the scraps, crumbled cornbread left from the week, mixed with chopped chicken livers, onions, and herbs pulled straight from backyard gardens. The scent of sage and broth filled the home long before the meal was ready, carrying the warmth of something earned, not bought. The giblets, boiled down to tender perfection, gave the dish a richness that spoke of making the most from what little there was. On Christmas Day, this was often the centerpiece, not because it was grand, but because it was shared. Families gathered around small tables and large pots, finding joy in the familiar taste of something humble. Cornbread dressing was not about luxury. It was about love stretched wide enough to feed everyone. Every bite carried memory, patience, and pride, the real flavor of the season. Molasses ginger snap cookies were the Christmas cookies that actually snapped when broken, spicy, and crisp, and perfect for dunking in coffee. Black mothers made these weeks before Christmas, storing them in tins where they stayed fresh through New Year's. The dough started with molasses, dark, not light, which gave the cookies deep flavor and dark color. Fresh ginger was grated into the dough along with ground ginger, creating layers of heat. The secret was black pepper and cayenne, just pinches that added complexity without obvious spiciness. The dough was chilled overnight, then rolled into balls, rolled in coarse sugar, and baked until the edges set. As they cooled, the centers firmed into the perfect snap. These weren't soft, chewy cookies, but proper ginger snaps that crackled. They were packed into tins with parchment between layers, given as gifts to neighbors and teachers. The pepper and cayenne edition stayed secret because most people couldn't identify what made these snaps more interesting. Which forgotten Christmas dish would you bring back to your holiday table? Share your memories in the comments, hit that like button, and subscribe so we can keep these blessed traditions alive together.